Okay, thank you, Ms. Lorraine. Okay, Superintendent Dixon, Superintendent's report.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. Can you hear me?
Yep, good to see and hear you.
Great. So yesterday we had an exciting public health approach meeting. So just to give a little bit of a summary, the committee, the Public Health Approach Committee, got through 2%. So they were not able to get through the other list, but we just got notice right before coming on this meeting that there will be a June 1st meeting. I believe it starts at 9 o'clock and will go until noon. And it's also my understanding that the chairs will have a little bit different strategy moving forward so that they can hopefully get through the rest of the agenda. We were given an assignment to work with the software companies that we have contracts with to see if they would be willing to come down and reduce their cost in accordance with possible budget cuts, and then agree to statewide pricing where the funding would go directly to the LEAs and they then would make some choices about the software that they use. So you might recall that one of our grants is a qualifying grant, and that's in the literacy software space. And then we have another one for ELL that's a competitive grant. So there are a variety of the ways that those contracts are set up, and Zach Christensen and his staff will be working on that task over the next week or so. So I don't know that we'll be ready with that information in a couple of days. It's quite an arduous task, but we'll work on the task we were given. The next item that I want to discuss is our ESSER funds. As you know, we sent in our application, we were approved right away, and all of the funding has been loaded into the grants management system. So far, we've had 16 applications from our LEAs turned in. 8 of those were approved, and then 8 just had a few little minor tweaks that needed to be redone in order to qualify. So those will come back in, and we can start sending out reimbursements as early as next week. So it's been a really good, quick turnaround process for our schools to be able to get the funding. I would just bring to your awareness some of our smaller LEAs, especially some of our smaller charters. The reimbursement part is a struggle for them if they have to have money up front to make a purchase and then get reimbursed. So that's something that I think we need to be aware of and continue to work on to see if there is a way for some of these smaller LEAs to make sure that they're getting their needs met and then a quick reimbursement. The GEAR funding is the governor's funding, and you might recall that this is not something that the board acts on. We talked a little bit about this last week, but the governor's office consults with us, and we use that survey data that we put out to all of our LEAs, and you might recall Jill's report to you, Jill Curry's report, with all the graphic representation of what our LEAs said that they would spend money on. That's a really great tool that we've been using to think about where we can fill the gaps and what the greatest needs are. So the governor's office used that data and then really looked at some of the focus areas of the governor, things that he's very passionate about, and have made a determination to focus their efforts on those LEAs that were, and students rather, within the LEAs that were most highly impacted by not receiving remote instruction. And we know that there were pockets, whether it's the digital divide or family circumstances, that they were just not able to engage. So really targeting funding to try and bridge that digital divide and make sure that kiddos get the help that they need. The last thing that I want to talk to you about would be advisory groups that I've been engaging with. So I put some teachers in a group, charter directors, principals, and superintendents, and basically just sending out a Google document with some questions and then meeting with them virtually a couple of times from now over the summer. And then on Friday, I'll be meeting with a broader council that includes parents and community partners. And the purpose is to help us think through policy and practices and guidance and really trying to find out what is helpful. This leads a little bit into an agenda item we're going to talk about shortly, and that is really defining roles. I know that Board Member Hanson made a motion, Board Member Earl and Board Member Lyran Davis were all very interested in this as well. So I'm excited about this conversation we're about to have on thinking about what is the board's role in guidance moving forward. But these advisory groups are small, and it's just a really great way to pose some questions and get their ideas, not only about what they experience, but what they need moving forward. Some of the big themes this morning in talking to teachers were things like teacher flexibility, needing definitions. So that teacher flexibility part may play into some policies and practices from us, maybe eliminating some policies or relieving some policies. And then also maybe some clear definitions about the differences between digital learning, homeschooling, remote learning, and maybe some ideas within that space so that everybody's using the same vocabulary, or that when everybody uses the same vocabulary, we know exactly what that means instead of having different descriptors about what it means. There was a great conversation about preserving in-person learning and how important that is to students and families and teachers and what that might look like going forward. So I just want you to know that those conversations that I'm having, they are the things that really energize me and give me a lot of information that I can then bring back to you as a board and move some conversations forward about your role and what you can do to support the needs out in the field. And I really appreciate the way that you're reaching out to all your constituents as well. Those of you that are on social media, I get to see it, but I know that everybody's doing so privately and having conversations. And that is really appreciated by the field to know that the board is really listening to how this has impacted our teachers, our students, our school administrators, and our communities. So those are the 4 things that I wanted to share to you, or share with you rather. Are there any questions or comments?
Board member questions or comments? It appears Board Member Earl. You have your hand raised.
Yes, it is. Am I on now?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I just had a question on the ESSER's funding, and I don't know, Superintendent, if you have the answers or if someone does. I'm just wondering, so if I understand right, this was intended, the money was dispersed according to Title I funds in our state. And so I'm just wondering, are schools able to receive funds only according to the Title I students they have in their schools? Is that how we're distributing that?
So that's a great question. The actual total dollar amount that we got as a state was based on our Title I funding. I think it was about 70% of the overall funds. And then that's just dispersed throughout the schools, kind of on a per pupil basis. But if you were a school who didn't receive Title I funds for the last 2 years, we had one district and I think 22 charters. Deborah can correct me if she's on the phone, or Sarah. But those schools are not eligible, but they are eligible for our 10% set aside if we chose to use it in that manner, and gear funding. So while they don't get part of that 90% allocation, they would get, they would be eligible for other funds.
Okay, and that's based on whether or not they apply for that funding, right? So they'll apply for it through a grant formula, and then that money will then be distributed to them. Do they have to? So I guess I haven't seen the grant paper, so I'm just wondering how a district goes about getting that. So I'm just asking the questions from this side.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. They were actually. Oh, that is weird. It just sounded like there was an alien on the phone. Sorry. So the amount that they received, that was already sent out in a spreadsheet. So the LEAs are aware of how much they are eligible for. And this is a reimbursement formula. So just like all the other title programs. So the amount for that school is loaded into the grants management system, and then they apply through the grants management system. And it's a reimbursement basis. So let's say their application has to be approved. So once that gets approved, then they use that Utah grants management system to get reimbursed. Deborah or Sarah, is there anything you would add to that so that we make sure we get board member Earl's question answered?
Deborah, are you on?
I think it's your microphone that's very strange.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Somebody's got a double mic on. Maybe turn your microphone on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Deborah.
Okay. I couldn't tell if I was on or off. So the bigger portion of the ESSER funds actually was distributed based on the Title I formula and how that went out. And yes, they do. It is in the grant system. They do apply for it, submit a plan for what they intend on spending the money for. And then, like Superintendent said, we've got the GEARS funding and the other 10% that will be distributed differently, which I don't know that we've got a decision made on the 10% yet, but it does go through the grant system based off of Title I funding. However, they can spend it on all students. Does that make sense? I don't know that I fully answered your question.
Board Member Earl, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I think that's closer. So let me just, if you don't mind me summarizing, just to make sure I understand that the money that was brought in, that districts or schools, LEAs, already have an understanding of how much they qualify for. They would then submit a grant to get the reimbursement for those funds. And then we have an amount that can be used for other schools and other capacities and however we need. Is that correct?
Yes, so we actually award the funds to them, and then they just submit basically a plan on how they intend on spending it, and then our grants managers will actually go in and approve those plans to make sure they fit within the parameters of the grant itself. And then, yes, we have additional funding that we can then distribute in other ways, which will go out in a separate grant.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes. Okay, Board Member Cannon has a hand up.
Yes, I did. Thank you. I have a question for Deborah. She mentioned that all of this money that comes to us is based on the Title I formula. My question is, does the Title I formula still utilize per pupil expenditure as part of what the state gets? As I recall, previously, the per pupil spending, the more you spent on per pupil, the more you got. And of course, Utah was always, over the last 30 years has been spending the least per pupil. Is that still an aspect of the Title I formula? Or maybe she could just tell us exactly what that Title I formula is.
That's probably a question for Deborah.
Deborah?
That actually would be a question for Rebecca Donaldson. Actually, they're the ones that run the formula. And I don't think we've got anybody on, but I can find the answer and I can get it to you.
Superintendent Dixon, can you follow up on that, make sure the board gets that formula?
Yes, it's a great question. We'll be happy to. In fact, I bet Rebecca's probably listening in and can type it to the board right now.
Okay. Any other questions for the superintendent? I am not seeing any other hands. Is that how you're seeing it, Vice Chair Cummins?
Yes.
Okay, Superintendent, thank you so much for your work on this. There is a lot going on.